Afternoon, very honorable guests, wonderful chairs, dear delegates, and the media team. We are Dasha Kamaza, Yaroslav Mohammedziar, and Filip Ravenka, the secretariat of the conference. We are very honored to have almost 400 applications for the first session of the Wind of Change Model United Nations. For many of the delegates, it is the first MUN experience, and we hope that today's conference will encourage them not only to participate in other MUNs, but also to spread the MUN ideals of international understanding and responsible citizenship in the future lives.
Lockdown closed all the opportunities for the MUN, so we decided to take the initiative and create the same international collaborative spirit in our online space. Our name is Wind of Change because we believe that students, the younger generations, can make a change through diplomatic discussions, raising the questions of global significance and suggesting solutions for them. Our aim is the high-quality free debate, a platform for dialogue and finding solutions. We managed to create an international community of chairs and delegates all around the world, starting from Lagos in Nigeria, finishing with Vladivostok in Russia.
Wind of Change Model United Nations joined the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Refugee Challenge, and this decision was based on the following reasons. Firstly, we want to raise awareness to the refugee crisis and its causes. And secondly, the challenge gives the opportunity for voices of the delegates be heard by the UN policymakers, which goes in parallel with our aims and values of political participation and freedom of speech. And that is why we need you all, dear delegates, to have fruitful debates and make your best to produce resolutions that reflect your country's opinions and provide the best possible solutions. Now is the time for our honorable speakers. We will have a Q&A session for your question afterwards.
It is easy to speak about refugee problems when these problems may be far away from you. However, while discussing refugee crisis, we cannot forget that for some people, it is not just an abstract concept, but it is a daily life scene. Our opening ceremony would be absolutely incomplete without our next guest, James Achuli, a young man from South Sudan who has gone through ordeals of being a refugee himself. James, please.
Oh, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is James, and I am from South Sudan. Just over a month ago, my friend Dasha from Russia invited me to this session, and I'm really happy that I'm here. And I also want to thank everybody who is here today and those following us online. I was born in 2003 and I'm 17. So at the age of 10, I was forced to leave my country because of civil war. And I ended up in a refugee camp in a country called Uganda, just south of South Sudan. And that is where I spent almost 7 years of my life. And I think living in the camp has really taught me a lot of things. And I think it's really important to share some of those experiences that I had in the camp in this opening ceremony. So living as a kid in the camp, the first thing that you always worry about when you wake up or before you go to sleep is thinking about when and where to get your next meal. And that is a problem, not only for me as a child, but it was a problem for everybody, the young and the old, because we were all crying together. And that lack of food was a problem because we were exposed to diseases and malnutrition. We had kids who died because of hunger, because we didn't have all the balanced diet to sustain our immune system. We had language barrier, for example, when we first arrived in there, and we didn't know how to talk to the UN officials, but at the same time, we didn't know how to talk to the host community. So these were basic problems we had when we first arrived. My school that I went to, we didn't have teachers. We didn't have clean water in those camps. We didn't have libraries. My primary school that I attended in the camp, we didn't have a library. And these were problems that most of the time, they were not looked after because the biggest concern is how to survive, food and things along those lines. So these are basically the category of essential items or basic needs that we didn't have in the camps. Um, we had also issues like gender-based violence. I had an 18-year-old friend of mine who was forced to marry a 45-year-old man because they thought that by marrying her to this man, the family would definitely get rich. And excuse me, this was something that distorted my thinking as a child in the camp, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Child labor was also one of those problems, and this is something that happened in the refugee camp in Uganda, but it's happening to almost refugees across the world. If you look at Western Africa or North Africa, or if you go to Yemen or countries like Bangladesh, as we mentioned earlier on, or if you look at the Myanmar situation right now, it's almost the same thing that is happening. And I think most of the time they're not looked into. And me growing up as a kid, I think it's not my first time seeing all of these things at the camp, because I was born personally in a society where we didn't have access to schools. And my family was 100% uneducated. My father didn't know how to use a pen to write. Excuse me. And that's the same thing to my mom. My sisters really didn't. Me being the last born, my sisters were forced to marry at a very young age. My brother, who was like the second last born, didn't go to school as well. And because my sisters were forced to marry at a very young age, that again killed my thinking. But even in these situations where we didn't have cars on the streets or even lights, I had to make sure that I got involved in selling plastics to plastic recycling companies so I could start my education, given the extreme poverty that my father or my mom could not like pay my school fees. And when I saw my sisters being harassed by their husbands, I had to use my soft power skills to try to stop the violence against women. But even after I lost almost all my family members, I had to risk my life and worked this long distance that I never thought I was like gonna make it. Like I never thought I would walk over 600 kilometers to a refugee camp. It was something I never thought it was possible. But yes, I had to swim to be able to survive. I had to climb on a tree to sleep, just to escape from wild animals. Or I had to learn how to bake on the way for food from those who had it in order to survive at the camp before reaching the camp. And even when I reached this camp, we had this language barrier. I was so tiny that I could not even stand the wind, but I decided to volunteer as an interpreter because, I mean, of what use is the knowledge of the 5 languages that I spoke if I could not use it to help my fellow people? If I speak Arabic and English, and I speak more 4 languages in this community where people, um, come from different backgrounds together, that is my job. And when I saw my 18-year-old friend, Margaret, forced to marry this 45-year-old man, I had to come up with projects to stop gender-based violence against women in the camps. These are burning issues that, if we look at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, well, they are giving us food, yeah, that's fine, but they tend to forget. I'm sorry to say this, but this is really the reality. They tend to forget some of these problems, which seem really small, but they're not small when it comes to the reality. So when I didn't have a library, I thought of entering a competition to make sure that I established a public library in the camp. And seeing this little kid go into this library and being able to open a book and read freely, it's just the happiest thing I want to see. And we didn't have water. Well, why not have a borehole so we can have access to free water that we want every day and not like being dehydrated? So Dasher and the organizing committee, like really organizing this session and bringing it like live, it's one of those things that I want to see because it reminds me that even in these times of crisis and the pandemic, it really means a lot to me, but also to other refugees that we are not forgotten, and I really want to appreciate this. And this is some of the things I really did in the camp, but there are also other inspiring stories. If you look at other refugees, they've gone ahead to do really, really massive things. For example, we have John in Sabe Manor. I'm sure you don't know him, but he was a victim of the Rwandan genocide who was also forced to leave his country and went to a refugee camp in Uganda and then ended up in one of the UW schools, Pearson College in Canada, and went to UBC and became a UNICEF Canada ambassador. And then being able to navigate the extremes and going all the way to the top and shape the lives of kids across the world is just one of the things we want to see. So what I am trying to say is that sometimes refugees, upon arrival, they're seen as, I don't know, a burden, because there is a lot to happen to be able to save them. But then if we give them chances to kind of being given the same opportunity just like anybody else around the world, then they can also contribute to the good of the society. I'm not saying that I've done a lot. Being able to make that library is not like the ultimate thing I wanted to, because I believe that there's always more. And that's why sessions like this will always be our job, my job, everybody's job, to keep fighting peacefully for the benefits of refugees. And we will hopefully keep organizing sessions like this. And if there is any organizing committee, and I would just encourage them to reach out to individual refugees who have gone through some of these extreme situations, and being able to share their stories, because that way we will be able to make a global impact. I will not waste a lot of time, but I really want to stop here. If you have any personal questions, just feel free to ask to the end of the session. The Q&A will be hopefully there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for sharing your story. Although MUNs work independently from the United Nations, the UN understands the importance of nurturing the future generations of diplomats, peacekeepers, and active citizens. That's why it strongly supports MUNs. The UN Refugee Agency gladly provided us the guest speaker, Chris Meltzer. Please welcome the spokesman of High Commissioner for Refugees, the person for whom the fighting with refugee crisis is a daily job.
Здравствуйте, и дорогие друзья. Меня зовут Крис Мельцер, я немец, и я работаю на УВКВ. Русский язык является одним из частей языков Организации Объединенных Наций. Я равно продолжу на английский. Mrs. President, distinguished delegates, with great honor, I take this opportunity to inform you about the situation of the refugees worldwide. I would like to inform you about these very serious recent figures of the World Refugee Report, and about the funding situations, and about the problems we face right now in the world. The newest report is just out for a few days. We have now not less than 79.5 million people who are forced to flee in the world. 79.5 million, almost 80 million. This is the population of countries like Iran, Turkey, or Germany. Just 9 million of them were just added to that in the last 12 months. 9 million, this is a country like Sweden, Azerbaijan, Hungary, or Serbia. And again, these are just the people who were forced to flee in the last 12 months. 79.5 million, this is 1% of the world population who's not at home, who's forced to flee. 26 million of them are refugees under the Geneva Refugee Convention. This convention declares a human a refugee when he or she is fleeing the country on a well-founded fear of being persecuted for a reason of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. But they are also people who fled their home for the same reasons, but they are still in their home country. These internal displaced persons make up 45.7 million people who are still very often in war zones. And there are another 4.2 million people who are asylum seekers, so pending cases, people who are not officially a refugee yet, but who have left their home. And again, we're talking not about migrants, we're talking not about people who left their home for probably very good reasons. No, we're talking about people who were forced to flee, who faced otherwise jail, persecution, or death. Let me talk about the 5 biggest refugee situations, because 68% of all refugees worldwide are from just 5 countries. There's Myanmar, where the Rohingya fled the country, especially in 2017. 1.1 citizens of Myanmar, 1.1 million citizens of Myanmar are now outside of their home country. Most of them are in Bangladesh, a country that also struggles with a lot of problems. From South Sudan, we see 2.2 million refugees. This is the youngest country in the world. It was formed just 9 years ago on July 9th in 2011. But 2.2 million people of that country are mostly in Uganda and in other countries as refugees. Afghanistan knows war for almost 5 decades. 2.7 million citizens of Afghanistan are now refugees. And 3.7 million Venezuelans are outside of their own country. And the biggest refugee situation by far is, of course, Syria, for now about 9 years. 6.6 million refugees from Syria we have worldwide in neighboring countries like Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Germany, and other countries. That brings us to the host countries. Let's face a situation that not all of the refugees are in Europe. As a matter of fact, less than 10% are, because 3 out of 4 refugees are in the direct neighboring country, always in the hope to go back to their home as soon as possible. The 5 biggest refugee hosting countries are Germany, who accepted 1.1 million refugees, Uganda, which hosts 1.4 million refugees, Pakistan with about the same amount, 1.4 million. Colombia have granted asylum for 1.8 million refugees, and still Turkey is the biggest host country with 3.6 million refugees. I would like to give you a few other figures you should know for your decision findings. For example, that 40% of the world's displaced people are children. That means in UN terms, they are younger than 18. 40%. Many of them have no chance to go to school, although this is a priority for UNHCR, and we tried very hard to give refugee children an education, but only about 2/3 of the refugee children have the chance of elementary school. And when it comes to secondary school, this number drops dramatically. 73% of refugees, I already mentioned this figure, are hosted in neighboring countries, and 85% are hosted in developing countries. And now the probably most disturbing figure, 80% are in countries already affected by acute food insecurity and malnutrition. Anyway, these countries gave protection to millions and millions of their neighbors. This brings us to the financial situation. Exactly 70 years ago, UNHCR started with a budget of $300,000. Nowadays, we have a budget of $8 billion, but it's covered only by half of it. The biggest donors are the United States, the European Union, and Germany. We have only a budget of $4 billion now, and if you take only the refugees, and you make an easy math, that means we have less than $100 per refugee per year for housing, for education, for food, for medicine, for everything. I don't have to explain that this is absolutely not enough. And again, I only speak about refugees, about more than 20 million refugees. That means to neglect the IDPs, the internally displaced persons, but we are not willing to do that. I would like to close with some remarks about the situation of refugees right now, in this moment, today. We are all affected by Corona, but the weakest and the most vulnerable will be more than others. and refugees are the weakest, the most vulnerable. Severe underfunding, conflicts and disasters threaten to leave millions of refugees across Africa without food. In addition, Corona led to damaged supply chain challenges and rising food prices and a loss of income. Millions of refugees throughout Africa are currently reliant on regular aid to meet their food needs. Around half of them are children who may develop lifelong difficulties if deprived of food at this vital stage in their development. In many parts of Africa, food prices are rising, posing a potentially devastating threat to millions of refugees, particularly those who were already living hand to mouth on daily wages. Let's take, for example, the Republic of Congo, where the average price of basic food basket has increased by 15%, while in Rwanda, the food prices were already on average 27% higher in April 2020 compared to 2019, and 40% higher than 2018. More than 3.2 million refugees in East Africa alone are already receiving reduced rations due to underfunding. For many people in the world, Corona means severe problems. For refugees, Corona means hunger, malnutrition, and health hazards. Mrs. President, distinguished delegates, the situation is serious, very serious. The more than 17,000 employees of UNHCR are working tireless and try to improve the situation of the displaced people in the world every single day. As a representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, I asked for your help, I beg for your help, I demand your help. Don't forsake 1% of the world population. Don't ignore the severe needs of 26 million children. Don't forget the refugees. It is the humanitarian crisis of our generation, and it's our legal and first and foremost, our moral obligation to help. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for your speech and for sharing this valuable information with us. And now, dear participants, anyone who views this ceremony, it's your time to ask questions to our honorable guests, either on live stream on YouTube, where Philippe, my colleague, would help me answering those, or our Instagram page, as we asked before. So the first question that was asked earlier, addressed mostly to Chris. So how one becomes a UN worker, how one can start a career in the UN body, and maybe you can describe the process or how you came to this position, because many delegates are wondering.
The process is not easy because, as you know, the United Nations are huge, and only UNHCR, as one of the biggest bodies, have 17,500 employees, and in total it goes fast in the 6 digits. There's a very helpful website. It's sorry, I looked that up. It's careers.un.org. There you can find an overview about dozens of possibilities to work with the UN. I highly recommend the United Nations as an employer because it's a great opportunity to help other people and also to help yourself to widen your horizon and to see things you can't see with other jobs. It is always good, of course, to speak different languages and to bring some skills that could be valuable for the United Nations, but there's barely something that's not needed. And you have to be flexible, of course, as well. But when you bring these skills, these willingness, then I think there is a chance to find some place within the United Nations. But again, check out careers.un.org, and I think that will be helpful for a lot of people.
Thank you so much. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask them. So someone is asking, where are you from? Someone just didn't hear it, and maybe you can just tell a little bit, where did you come from? Where do you live right now? That's what our viewers are wondering about.
I'm from Germany, and I was the most part of my life a journalist, actually, for 27 years, and a foreign correspondent. And my last job as a journalist was to be UN correspondent in New York. And when I returned to Berlin, I was actually very bored, because after New York, you really need a new challenge on something, and Berlin is not. At the same time, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees looked for a new spokesperson for Germany. And by the way, you introduced me as the spokesperson of the High Commissioner. I'm only one of them. He has several different languages, of course. I'm the only one for German. So my office is in Berlin. This is where I'm working 90% of the time. But this job also brings with us that you travel a lot. I'm also part of the so-called ERT, Emergency Response Team, and these are the people who have a packed suitcase under their bed and a lot of vaccinations in their blood, so that they can go within 72 hours to nearly every place in the world. I already mentioned Bangladesh. That was a very surprising situation, because no one could really foresee that hundreds of thousands, it's indeed hundreds of thousands, about 700,000 people came over the border in just a few months, in just 2 or 3 months. So that's why I was twice in Bangladesh for several months. And this is very, very helpful for your own development. I'm 48 years old, but you can learn every day, especially in these situations. If you take Kutupalong, this is the biggest refugee camp in the world. It has 640,000 inhabitants. This is a city like Boston or Las Vegas or Amsterdam or Stuttgart or something. But there's no building higher than 2 meters. They are made out of bamboo and tarpaulins from UNHCR. They have no windows, no electricity, no water or something like that. And all what the people have, what they could carry in their own arms when they came from Bangladesh. And quite often that were their children or their parents when they were old. These are really the weakest, the poorest people you can imagine. And when you go back to a very developed, rich country like Germany, it's sometimes not so easy to switch again. And this is probably the best the UN can offer, to widen your personal horizon about the needs of the situation of other people in the world.
Both of your speeches were very inspiring, and that's why our honorable delegates ask what they personally, as high school students, university students, or young professionals, can do to help refugees.
That's a very good question. Actually, you can start right in your neighborhood, because very often they are refugees. And when they are refugees, there are problems. I say, of course, there are quite often 2 different kind of people clashing to each other. It's the same thing like Norwegians come to Sweden, and it was, of course, the same, probably the same thing like Syrians coming to Germany, or people from South Sudan coming to Uganda. There are 2 different people. There will be problems, but actually, normally, you can solve the problems very easily, 99% of them, by just communicating, talking to them. So in Germany, I say very often to the people, have you talked to the refugees? Have you asked them what are their problems? Have you told them about your problem you have as a German? And suddenly the problems vanish, and suddenly friendships develop. So if there are refugees around, try to talk to them. Probably you can find a new friend. The other thing is, political pressure is always good to make yourself heard. And if it's your opinion that your country, whatever country it is, has to help refugees, then just make yourself heard. You are just one person under probably a million other persons, of course, but you are one voice. You are one vote. And you can also influence the politics of your country. And you have to do it with others, of course, and you have to find other people, and you have, of course, in a democracy, to accept also if other people have other opinions, but make yourself heard. This can help a lot. And of course, there are always opportunities to help very directly refugees, probably in asylum in your home country, also with, let's say, UNHCR or with an NGO. I know many people who brought some special skills like speaking a language that was in high demand, or probably medical students and something like that. So they went to another country for 3 months, for maybe 6 months, sometimes for a year. And I know also stories about people, for example, in Bangladesh, who went there for a couple of months and stayed there now for 10 years or something like that. And then you can have a very direct way. And that will not be an easy time, definitely not, but it will be brighten your personal horizon, and you can take experience out of that for your whole life.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. And we also want to ask a question to James, another speaker of ours. So someone is wondering, what is the quality, the character trait that helped you the most to fight these struggles and to create all these amazing projects to help your fellow students and just people around you?
Well, thank you very much. That's a good question. I think the kind of environment that I grew up in is basically the reason why I was so tough on myself. Me being as the last born and being able to go to attend school is something else. I didn't want to do that because I want to make history and being like the first person to go to school in my family, but because I saw the uselessness of calling myself perhaps a global citizen without getting education. And so when I saw my friends going to school and I didn't have the access to, well, I had to listen to the BBC almost every day to get to know how to pronounce the alphabet. I had to sing songs in English to learn all of this. So it's the kind of hardship. So seeing the violence and the hardship and all of these things together just made me really, really strong and kind of keep fighting, I think, for what I wanted. So, but again, before I lost my father, he was always there to encourage me in every hard situation, even when he didn't have the money. So he said one day that, James, I want you to believe I'm important. I want you to believe in your ability to bring about change, not only to yourself, but also to the people around. So every time I kind of recall that, it just makes me want to stand up and just keep running and fighting for what I want. So it's a combination of friends, a family, and all the people around giving me the encouragement to continue with that move.
Okay, thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Mr. Meltzer. We are very honored to have you at our conference as our key guest speakers. Now let's move to the next point, the timetable of our conference. Now you can see it. So at the day one after today, after the opening ceremony, you will join your committees on the Discord platform and will get to know your chairs and colleagues. Today you will have 2 work sessions, which are aimed at lobbying and drafting your resolutions. At the end of the day, you will open the committee observation box and have some fun with your chairs and committee. The second day is fully dedicated for debate. You will start at 12 p.m. and you will have 2 work sessions as well. The day will end with a closing ceremony on our YouTube channel, where the best delegates from each committee will receive their awards. This said, we're happy to have this mixture of cultures and ideas at our conference, and we're happy to announce that the first session of the Wind of Change Model United Nations online conference is officially open.